What's cooking, folks? Vermillion Phoenix here, and today we're jumping into some more Orcs must die Unchained. This time we're going to begin our run with Tundra. So Tundra is the character that won the voting poll, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. People have wanted a lot of the Ice heroes to be featured, and I haven't for a while, just because they haven't won the polls. But we're here now, so we're gonna do Tundra. We might get around to Hogarth if he wins the next poll. But I think Ice characters have a lot to be said for them in this game, because Ice primarily doesn't deal a ton of damage. They have some damage amp mechanics for Tundra, but mainly what they do is they crowd control. It's a really odd sort of crowd control that deals with the frequency of Ice attacks on enemies, but that eventually holds them in place. But it's kind of interesting and kind of cool the way it works. But it means that stacking Ice attacks is going to be really important. So you're going to want to make sure that you have something that deals a good amount of Ice damage. Ice vents are my personal favorite. Things like the Saw of Arctos are also good. Saw of Arctos has a bit too high of a cooldown to be reliable in some cases though. So this is basically what we're going to be going through with most of Tundra's runs until we get to a stage where it might not be particularly good. If that happens, I'll think about it, play on it, see what I say or what I think about it at the time, but ultimately you'll get to see what I think works pretty well for Tundra if it's your first time using the character. So we have Bear Hugs. It is the close range damage bonus. You also get your cooldown bonus for it being slotted, which makes all of your cooldowns come back a bit sooner. Wall Building PhD, just because it's probably one of the best diamond traits that you can get. Ice Cold deals. We're going to be using ice traps because they give Tundra a damage bonus, and making sure that those ice traps are used in places where they are able to catch a good amount of enemies means we're going to have to place them somewhat often. Now the ice vent itself is a little wieldy, so where I'm placing it's going to seem kind of weird, but ultimately it should work out. And yeah, let's hop in and see how this goes. We also have Fire Sale because a lot of our damage comes from Floor Scorcher and Spitfire Wall on most maps, and pretty much going to stay that way. Like there's other solutions, but that will require swapping out the fire traps for physical damage traps, and I think having a mix of fire and ice is actually pretty cool. But let's go into the baths. Love that character art too. Sweet. Now, I'm hoping that if they do create more bear characters, or just another Orcs game, that they do create more bear characters, because I think seeing more characters from different regions in the world of Center is actually pretty cool. And the bears you've always fought against, but you've never actually got the chance to play as until Tundra showed up. Now, he's one of the polar bears. There are other bears, they're grizzlies. And it would be interesting to see if they also are some part of all the festivities and odd things going on in Center.
But I suppose we must stop at nothing. If we must.
All right.
Magic are a poor substitute for
That's kind of how I like to start. We slow all the enemies down. Actually, I'm overspending here. Enemies have to come out of these two center areas, at least when they first come out here, and then they can spread out a little bit more than just these two spaces when they're coming through. But you can keep everything to like a 2-2 formation here. It's not bad. We can use the stable hand to slow them a bit more. But let's actually talk about Tundra's basic abilities. So it's the Oathkeeper of Arctos. Passive is interesting in that it makes enemies freeze longer if he triggers the freeze on them, and they take more damage from his attacks while frozen. So freezing normally doesn't last as long when other characters do it, but the really important aspect is that all of his attacks are going to deal more damage against frozen enemies. Now Tundra deals only ice damage, so it's both magical damage, meaning if you're looking for attack buffs, anything that reduces magical armor or specifically ice armor is going to be good. If anything has bonus magic or ice armor, he's going to deal less damage, and that's important. But he also has primarily crowd control abilities on top of dealing ice damage, which is just a really ridiculously strong combo. Q is Wall of Frost. Wall of Frost is weird. mainly because it seems like it's just something that you throw out there and it's supposed to make enemies walk around it, but actually in the right places it can seal enemies off completely, and they can't walk through it at all. They can attack it if it's the only thing there, but most enemies won't have the ability to destroy it. You also cannot shoot ranged attacks through it. So if you guys are familiar with Overwatch, it's another game that uses a similar ability, but attacks don't go through it, neither yours nor your enemies. It's just going to be blocked. So if you're melee, you can kind of walk through and swing. If you're ranged, you're just going to have to wait until it goes down or decide to fight on the other side of it. There is a weaver that allows you to deal damage after walking through it at tier 2. Wall of Frost adds 40% frost damage to heroes' primary attacks when they pass through it. It's only the primary attack, so it's still a little tricky to actually make it work, mainly because offensive abilities generally don't do that much when you're playing in parties. So that's something that's sort of odd to choose, just because it means you want to play really close up to your enemies, and it only works for your primary attacks, which on some characters is most of their damage, on others is almost none of it. So it really pays to know how the other characters that you're playing with deal damage if you're going to use that in a party, but most of the time it's probably not going to be the best pick, just because snowballing is actually really fun and useful. But there are going to be times when chilled weapons is worth it. So again, knowing how your other characters deal damage, if they're primarily working off of their primary attack or they just have a bunch of damaging AoE abilities, that's going to be important to know. But that's just with the Frost Wall. It's a really good crowd control tool. Keeps enemies from bunching up in the right places, and some places can stop them altogether. But from there we move on to Flash Freeze. Flash Freeze is about a 2 of these regular 1x1 spaces. Goes about 2 tiles forward. It's 1 tile wide from the center of Tundra, so about right here it will freeze everything in front of you. So here, and then like this first corner of the freeze trap. Basically, if you take this half of the freeze trap itself, that's a 1x2, and that's about the area that it freezes, and everything in there is instantly frozen, regardless of any other statuses that they have. It makes it so that you will deal bonus damage after they're frozen because of his passive ability. So it's really good to combo for some bonus damage, and it's a good way of stopping anything that an enemy may be trying to do at the time. So it's nice as a really, you know, kind of interrupt for enemies, as well as making sure you get a temporary damage buff. And then from that we have his left shift. It's his support ability. It's Avalanche, which basically is you roll into a snowball and then you sort of super monkey ball it around the map a bit. You can control it. There are a lot of abilities or weavers that change what it does. You can decrease the cooldown with Avalanche potential. Tier 2, you can take snowballing, which increases the damage and the speed and maneuverability. Then you can get crushing flow. When you break out of the snowball, you deal damage to enemies around you. And I think that's it. Those are the 3 snowball weavers, but they all make it more interesting. Normally it has a pretty significant cooldown, and you can see that's about as fast as you can turn with it, I think. But still, it's a very useful ability. Rolling through enemies deals damage. If you take some of the other perks, you can increase the damage that it deals, as well as add an instance of damage when you break out of it, which is also nice. But overall, it's a really good movement ability and a way to get some extra freezing on enemies, chill stacks, because I haven't talked about ice too much. Then we have his primary attack, which is just a swing of a scepter. Adds chill stacks because it deals ice damage. And his right click is Icicle Burst, which fires 3 icicles at enemies that you can increase to 4. You can decrease the cost of it, and you can also make it so that it does a small AoE or decrease the cooldown of Flash Freeze, which is this ability here. All of those are very good. The AoE on the right click has actually been nerfed. a while back, if you guys are used to a really old playstyle for Tundra or just the way he worked before. But overall, he's still really solid as a character. Now, chill stacks. I should probably talk about ice overall, probably in another video, but for now, ice damage adds these status effect stacks on an enemy called chilled stacks. Each stack of chilled doesn't really do much, but it will stack until you hit about 4 stacks on an enemy and then convert into a frozen status effect. When the enemy is frozen, they stop, they turn into a block of ice, and for Tundra, they will deal extra damage. So having ice damage come from other things, such as these lovely ice vents here, will increase the damage that Tundra does. So it's to Tundra's benefit to actually combo ice traps into his other attacks to make sure that the enemies are as slowed as possible, controlled, and take bonus damage. With him only dealing ice damage himself, you'll notice his damage output is a little bit lower, and that's just something to be aware of. But even without the other ice traps, he is still competent at dealing damage. So don't think you need to bring ice traps with you. It's not necessary, it just helps.
Beware, intruder.
But that's it. Let's go ahead and try to wreck the bats real quick.
Enemy has opened a minion portal.
Also, there is no interaction between the burning and the chilled status effects. You can have both, and they won't interrupt each other or anything like that, just in case anybody was wondering. So, start the fire. Everybody's on fire from everything here. You can see on the enemies that do manage to become frozen, if I can get some freezes happening. Let's see, doing about 169 on the primary target here. On the frozen enemies, you see that goes up a lot. No, the highest attack is 373. Okay. I've leveled up though, so that's gone up a bit, but those 613s that are popping up are from the armor reduction or bonus damage combos of everything that's going on here. Now, for his first upgrade, my usual choice is going to be Brittle Ice if I'm playing solo. Brittle Ice increases the damage dealt to frozen targets. If you're using ice traps and you are the only player, that means you have a lot of control over when the freezes are going to happen, and that 25% bonus damage is pretty significant. As you can see, it's more than doubling the damage that I deal with everything that's happening here, so that is really nice. It's okay to take iced over if you are going to use any of the other abilities that Tundra has to sort of control enemies. That's probably a good way to go about it. Tundra has a very large pool of mana though. At 225, I think he's the highest mana pool for any melee character in the game. And that's important because Avalanche is a drain of your mana over time while it's active. Normally has a maximum duration, but taking one of the Weavers removes that. So that's important to understand as well. That's the first one here, Avalanche potential. If you want to be able to roll all over the map and not just be able to roll for a short period of time, quick tip, for Avalanche, you want to tap the key, not hold it. If you hold it, it will roll for a moment and then it will stop rolling, which will basically break your Avalanche sooner than you normally would want to. That's not good for anybody, so don't do that. Make sure you tap it, and then if you want to release it, you can tap it again. So you can do something like this. Roll over to wherever you need. Whoop. Not out of the map, hopefully. If you stop at any point by hitting a wall, it'll automatically break you out. So that's good too. Ultimately though, I'm going to go with Brittle Ice here. We're at the tier 2 Weavers already. So Frosty Aura is basically if you're going to be the tank for any given period or any map, it will slow the enemies that hit you down. Now, slowing the movement speed of enemies that hit you isn't really that big of a deal. There are other ways to sort of kite enemies around, and they'll only hit you for a short period of time. So I really don't see Frosty Aura as being too useful. It's a 30% slow and it's for 3 seconds. It stacks with other slows, but still not that amazing. Snowballing, if you took the avalanche potential, is going to be a super nice combo. You get the bonus damage, you get to maneuver way better. It's just a good idea. If you did not take it though, chilled weapons is a good choice. Usually you're going to see some combination of chilled weapons or snowballing being picked, just because of the practicality of them. If you're playing with Tundra solo, then picking chilled weapons and then just walking through the wall after you summon it for the bonus damage is not a bad idea. Although I'm not sure if you get more chilled stacks since you get the bonus weapon damage on the from the wall. And when you see that glow on you, that's when you know you got the bonus damage going. Now tier 3 is where most of the interesting stuff in the game usually happens. You have Deep Freeze, which increases the freeze duration of permafrost by 25%. This is pretty important. You freeze enemies longer if you're hitting them with your primary attack, Deep Freeze, or your left shift avalanche. That can be pretty good, but depending on the build that you're going for, if you're going to focus on icicles for the combo of Deep Freeze later on, then you want to go with Icicle Assault instead. It also makes your right click 33% stronger. Since it's on a cooldown, that's pretty significant. And it already does a good amount of damage. So either of these is good, though if you want to go full avalanche, then Crushing Blow is pretty good. I'm going to go with the Icicle Burst for now.
That trap goes on the ceiling.
I do not love these, but I suppose I love our enemy less. I would rather feel my enemy's last breath upon my
Alright, that's all of the ballistas that we will ever need. That makes sure that we no longer have to worry about bosses ever. Alright. Now, Flash Freeze normally has the longest cooldown of any of Tundra's abilities, and before you get to your last tier of upgrades, you can't really affect it much. What was he throwing at? Pretty much looked like everything was dead. I don't know. Alright, we're just gonna roll back here for some health. Alright, we got a Gaiden. Gaiden is not affected by chilled stacks or pretty much anything else that we have here. Neither are the earth elementals, so none of your abilities are really going to work against them. The only thing that you can do to earth elementals is knockback. It is a physics ability, but it is not a slow. All slows or stuns, including freezing, they are immune to. So tier 4 is going to be where everything gets super duper interesting. I guess back here we'll add the regular lances.
Well placed, I think. Rude, but I suppose we must stop at nothing.
But here we have Freezer Burn, which decreases the cooldown remaining on Flash Freeze by 3% every time an icicle hits, which means that extra icicle, if you took that at tier 3, is super important. Then we have Shattering Icicles. Each shot from icicles explodes and deals 50% of its damage to enemies around it. Now that is capped, I believe, at 4 enemies. It won't deal more than 4 enemies because previously, when that didn't have a cap, if you could group up enemies tight enough, it would scale his damage ridiculously well. And so Tundra was pretty much one of the best damage dealers in the game, hands down. That removed that benefit of scaling and made it so that it was a lot more flat, which, you know, is a pretty significant nerf. But either way, it was competition for Freezer Burn, but now I think Freezer Burn is probably the best choice. You also have Stay Frosty, which makes it so that you get damage over time on frozen enemies whenever you use Flash Freeze. It's not that strong, so I'm not going to recommend you guys pick that very often, but I'll give you a quick rundown of, you know, showing you what it does while I'm here. Also, if I'm right, I believe you can freeze enemies through here. Yes.
An unstable rift is opening. It must be destroyed.
And I think the worst thing about all that is just that the ticks don't happen every like second, so you just see like a ridiculously huge set of damage and then a regular one, which seems really underwhelming. I mean, it's a good amount of damage, but it's not amazing. If it was, you know, something like every time enemies are frozen, they take that damage instead of only with flash freeze, it would be really nice. Just because that would mean you'd want to trigger a lot more freezes with Tundra, and it would be like a really aggressive sort of, you know, crowd controlling playstyle. But maybe the devs thought something like that would be too powerful. Either way, this still isn't horrible. It used to be bugged and not scale with damage, with battle levels, but now it does. So it's not too bad. I mean, this is damage at level 100, which is pretty much the max damage that you're going to be able to deal with it. And unfortunately, because those bonuses weren't spread out, you can't do like a full like flash freeze build on the hero, which if development for this game had ever picked up, that's probably something that the devs would have done, like rebalance the weavers so you could go like, you know, all flash freeze or all avalanche, or maybe some sort of mixed utility build for just permafrost and the wall, which you can kind of do, but you know, everything's kind of mixed up, so it really comes down to whether or not you just want to really comes down to just whether or not you want to have icicle burst or flash freeze be like your core skills. Avalanche can be buffed, but ultimately I think you lose out on a lot more crowd control and damage potential by picking Avalanche than you do with the other things. But yeah, you can see why the combos of freezing and everything else are super strong for Tundra. And this isn't even his, this is actually the worst setup if you actually want crowd control for him. Both of the other options for tier 4 give you a much more consistent crowd control setup, which combos better with his permafrost. And there we go. Alright, so that's great. I did a lot of the damage there, didn't let the traps do much. Relatively weaker enemies just because of how over leveled I am, but that was something like endless, then I would have had to rely on the traps quite a bit more. But either way, that was the baths. We're going to be moving into maximum security, and that will involve a bit more, well, a lot less of me talking about the hero and a bit more of me talking about what's possible within the actual maps, because this one isn't quite as straightforward, although it is still pretty simple. But that'll be for next time. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Feel free to leave me any comments about what you think about it, you know, the character, the game, or just, you know, the channel, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I want to thank you guys for sticking around, and I hope you again enjoyed it. But for now, I want you to take care of yourselves, and as always, until next time, have a good one, folks.